Welcome to Board Game Brawl. My name is Nick, and today we're taking a look at Dungeon Roll, possibly one of the tiniest games that I own. It is by Tasty Minstrel Games, designed by Chris Darden, and this was a very successful Kickstarter for what it was. It was a very cheap game, but it made a lot of money and had a lot of backers because the price point was right. But it's basically a dice checking game for 1 to 4 players, and there's been a lot of those lately, like King of Tokyo, very, very successful. But is this one different than those enough that it's a game in its own right and that it's a good game? Well, let's take a look at it, and I'll come back and tell you what I think. In the game of Dungeon Roll, 1 to 4 players are going to be leading adventuring parties into a dungeon for glory and fame. So the very first thing you're going to do in the game is randomly deal out one of the character cards. Now, if they're from the base game, you have characters like the Enchantress and the Crusader and the Knight. And each side of the card, on the other side of the card is an advanced version that you're going to have access to the first time that you gain 5 XP. And they change their names, like the Dragon Slayer, and they'll have a better special ability. Now, the expansion pack that came with the Kickstarter edition has some different cards like the Leprechaun and the Sorceress, the Tracker, and the Kickstarter exclusive Guild Leader, who is pretty cool because she's actually going to add 1 extra die, and we'll get to the dice in a second. But they all function in basically the same way. You're going to see that each of them has a special ability at the top of their card, which is you can use whenever it applies, as many times as you want on your turn. But in the larger box, the ultimate ability you can only use once per dungeon delve. And like I said, on their advanced side, they have a better version of that ability, but they can still only use it once per dungeon delve. So once every player has their character card, the head of their adventuring party, you're going to decide turn order, and the very first thing you do is you're going to form your adventuring party. So you're going to take all 7 of these white dice, and like I said, the guild master gets an 8th die, and you're going to roll all of them. And these determine what heroes make up your adventuring party. If you have this little Hammer of Thor symbol, you're going to get a cleric. The hats are wizards. The bandit masks are thieves. The green cross swords are fighters. And then you have the champion. You also have a scroll. Now, after you form your adventuring party, if you roll a scroll, you can re-roll as many of your white dice and the black dungeon dice as you want. And let's talk about those black dungeon dice, because when you form your adventuring party, the player to your left is going to take control of the Dungeon Lord. The first thing the Dungeon Lord does is sets the 10-sided dungeon die to 1, representing that you are on the first level of the dungeon. And because you're on the first level, you're going to roll, the Dungeon Lord is going to roll just 1 of these dungeon die. And all the dungeon die are the same with the same sides. And whatever comes up is the threat that the adventuring party has to face on that level of the dungeon. And there's several different things. Now, if you're lucky, you might get a treasure chest. And the heroes just have to spend 1 of their heroes to open that treasure chest. And they spend a hero by actually taking 1 of their adventuring party and putting it in the graveyard, on the graveyard card. If there were multiple treasure chests rolled, they'd have to use a champion or a thief to open all of them, or they'd have to use multiple heroes to get every single treasure chest. They could also get a potion, which is just going to let them spend a hero to take a hero back from the graveyard. But if they're unlucky, they're going to get one of the other sides, which could be skeletons, oozes, goblins, or the dragon. Now, the dragons are special, and I'll get back to them in a minute. But assuming that you roll one of the other monster sides, you have to decide how you're going to kill it. Because if you don't kill the monsters that come up on the die, you are going to get kicked out of the dungeon and you won't get any rewards. So in order to kill goblins, you're going to have to either spend one of any hero, or A fighter or a champion will be able to kill any amount of goblins. And in fact, the champion is probably the best hero that you can get because he can take out any amount of any one type of monster. And that's kind of how the other heroes are going to function too in their own specialized ways. So the fighters can take out every goblin that comes up, but only one of the other monsters. The clerics can take out every skeleton, but only one of the other monsters. The wizards do it for the oozes, and the thieves can take out every single treasure chest. And like I said, the champions can take out everything of one type. Now, if you go through the first level of the dungeon and things worked out well for you, you'll tell the dungeon lord, and then you go on to level 2. So the dungeon lord for that turn moves it up to level 2, and now the dungeon lord has to roll 2 dice. But you're stuck with whatever your adventuring party is, including adventurers you may have spent. So there's a push your luck aspect. You're going to keep spending adventurers in order to proceed through the dungeon, but the number of dungeon dice that are rolled get higher and higher all the way up to 10. And let's get back to those dragons. Because every time a dragon comes up on the dungeon die, it's going to get put into the Dragon's Lair card. When there are 3 or more dragons on the Dragon's Lair card on one of your turns, on one of your expeditions into the lower level of the dungeon, after you finish going through the monsters and after you finish going through the loot that you may roll, you're going to have to fight that dragon. In order to kill the dragon, you have to spend 3 heroes, and each one must be different. So I would have to spend a thief, a wizard, a fighter, or I could have a champion, a fighter, and a wizard. Any combination, but they all have to be different. Then I get to kill the dragon, take an experience point, which are like victory points in this game, and I get to take a treasure token. Now the treasure tokens are randomly distributed in the box that the game comes in. So whenever you want one, you're going to take one at random without looking from here. And the treasure tokens all do different things. A lot of them behave just like the die, the character die that you take. So if I have the green sword, I can expend this to have it count as a fighter. And this one is for the wizards. Some of them do different things. For instance, the one that looks like a ham, if I spend this, it's dragon bait, and it can turn every monster that just got rolled in the dungeon into dragon dice that immediately go into the dragon's lair. The Ring of Invisibility, on the other hand, will remove all the dragon dice from the dragon's lair if you expend it. The thing is, the treasure tokens are also worth points at the end of the game, so you may want to conserve them. Now, whenever you choose to stop going through the dungeon, assuming you weren't killed by monsters, you get to score however many experience points were on the dungeon level die. So, if you stopped at the 4th level, decided to take your winnings and leave, you would claim 4 points, and you get to keep all of your treasures. And basically, play is going to continue like that. Once you're done and you've decided you don't want to go any further, you're going to hand all these white dice to the next player in line, and then the next player in line from that person is going to become the dungeon lord for the turn. And it's going to go like that in clockwise order until each player has gone on 3 dungeon delves. At that point, you add up all the points you've earned from going into the dungeon, plus whatever leftover treasure you have, and whoever has the most is the winner. Alright, well, before I say anything about what I really think about the game and its mechanics, there's 2 really big pet peeves I have about it. First and foremost, the game came with a rule book that was missing an entire page. Or I should say that there was a page that was doubled up, the game setup page listed twice, blanking out an entire page of important information. Now, it's not a huge deal, and I don't want to be nitpicky about it, but missing an entire page, that is a huge deal, actually. I've worked in printing for 15 years, and if an entire page from a book was missing, somebody's probably getting fired. But, okay, that was an honest mistake, I suppose. But then again, Tasty Minstrel Games has done a lot of Kickstarters, so I don't know, that kind of bothered me. The other thing is the little victory point markers, the experience point markers. They are double-sided, which means that you have to be doubly sure not to flip them over accidentally or not, otherwise you're going to mess up your score count. It'll be 5 on one side and 1 on the other. I know they needed to conserve space to get into this tiny little box, which, to be honest, it's neat looking, but I don't like it. I know they were trying to conserve space with that, but really, that was just annoying. They really should have they should have made it all 1s and added some extra ones in there. They still would have been able to fit it in the box. I'm not sure why they did it. So anyways, about the game itself, I like it. It's a very simple dice chucking game, push your luck game, which people are either going to love or hate. It doesn't have too much strategy to it, but you do have a lot of choices to make. You have choices about when to use your special abilities. Do you conserve adventurers in order to go deeper into the dungeon, or do you use your adventurers quickly to get more and more treasure, which could also be points at the end of the game? Do you try and take out that dragon as often as you can, or do you try to avoid it as much as possible? So those little choices are, you know, they give you a sense that you do have a deeper strategy to it, but really it's a lot simpler than that. And well, first off, I found that the solo game was really not worth the effort. Just trying to get more and more points didn't really have much excitement to it, especially since there was no penalty, so you just kept going. But the more players that you have, the better, I would say. Although I did feel that if a player is spending a lot of time going through more and more levels of the dungeon, the other players just kind of sit there with not much to do. Even the dungeon lord, who once they roll the die, just have to wait for the active player to make their decisions. But for what it is, for the price point that it was at, it's a decent game. You know, there's going to be people that really like it, there's going to be people that don't. I thought it was okay. It'll probably be on my shelf for a while. And it certainly is in the same family and genre of games like King of Tokyo, where if you just need a filler, if you just need something to pass time until people show up for your board game group, you can't go wrong. It's good for that. So, this has been Board Game Brawl, and I am Nick, reminding you to game every day in every way.